step quietly into a British classroom in the early 1950s, the first thing you notice is the stillness. Rows of wooden desks sit bolted to the floor, each with its little inkwell waiting. Chalk dust hangs faintly in the air, and somewhere a clock ticks far louder than it should. Children sit upright, hands folded, eyes forward, already knowing what is expected before a word is spoken. For many of us watching today, this scene feels oddly familiar. We can almost feel the hard seat beneath us, smell the polish on the floor, hear the scrape of a chair moved without permission. Back then, these details weren't remarkable. They were simply how school worked. No explanations, no discussions, just rules absorbed as naturally as breathing. What may surprise us now is not how strict it looks, but how ordinary it felt. This was everyday life, not a headline or a scandal. Children didn't compare notes or question routines at home. You accepted them because everyone else did too. Authority wasn't debated. It was woven into the fabric of the classroom. Today, if we stepped into that same room with modern eyes, we would probably stop in our tracks. The silence would feel heavy. The posture would seem enforced. The methods used to keep order would raise immediate questions. Yet at the time, most of us never questioned it at all. That's what makes this journey so fascinating. Not the shock alone, but the realization that an entire generation grew up thinking this was normal. To understand how British school life changed so dramatically, we first need to remember just how quietly it all began. And as we rewind these memories, we may find ourselves recognizing parts of our own childhood that time quietly tucked away without ever really asking why. In the years after the war, Britain was a country rebuilding not just its streets, but its sense of order. Rationed books were still tucked into kitchen drawers. Houses were crowded, and classrooms often overflowed with children born during the hopeful post-war baby boom. In that world, structure was not seen as harsh, it was seen as necessary. Schools reflected the wider national mood. Britain had survived by following rules, keeping routines, and trusting authority. Many teachers had lived through wartime service or evacuation themselves, and they carried those lessons straight into the classroom. Clear instructions, firm boundaries, and quiet compliance were believed to create safety. A well-ordered room meant fewer worries, fewer disruptions, and children ready to take their place in a demanding society. Resources were stretched thin. One teacher might be responsible for 40 or more pupils, all squeezed into a single room. There was little time for individual attention and even less space for debate. Order kept the day moving. Silence meant lessons could be delivered. Stillness meant everyone was manageable. It wasn't about unkindness. It was about control in an era that prized efficiency over expression. Parents, too, largely supported this approach. Many believed strict schooling was a gift, not a burden. If a child came home subdued or serious, it was often taken as proof they were being shaped correctly. Education was preparation for life, not a place for feelings. Respect meant listening, obeying, and not answering back. There was also a deep belief that fairness meant treating everyone exactly the same. Rules applied equally, regardless of personality or temperament. Standing out was discouraged, not because it was wrong, but because sameness felt safe. In a society still healing, predictability mattered. The school day ran like clockwork, offering parents reassurance that their children were being prepared for a world that demanded conformity before creativity. Few questioned whether quieter children disappeared into that system because questioning itself was a luxury Britain felt it could not yet afford. Recovery came first, reflection much later, quietly. Today, we tend to view childhood very differently. Modern classrooms talk about confidence, well-being, and understanding emotions. We ask children how they feel and encourage them to speak up. Back then, those ideas would have sounded strange, even indulgent. Childhood was seen as training for adulthood, and adulthood, as many remembered, was not gentle. Looking back, it becomes clearer why those classrooms felt so rigid. They were built on survival lessons, passed down quietly, without explanation. To the people living it, strictness wasn't cruelty. It was reassurance, and it set the stage for rules and routines that would shape millions of young lives, often without a single word needing to be said. This happened in almost every classroom, though few of us ever spoke about it. The rules were not written on the wall, yet everyone knew them. You learned them quickly, usually within your first week, by watching what happened to others. A shuffle of feet, a glance in the wrong direction, and suddenly the room felt tighter, quieter, more watchful. Silence was the first rule, and perhaps the most powerful. Talking was not simply discouraged, it was unthinkable. Lessons unfolded to the sound of chalk and breathing, nothing more. If you needed help, you raised a hand and waited, sometimes for what felt like forever. Many children simply stayed quiet, fearing that any sound might draw attention. You didn't complain at home. You assumed the silence was your responsibility to maintain. Morning routines were rehearsed with almost military precision. Coats were removed in the same way, bags placed under desks, chairs pushed in at identical angles. The bell did not just signal the start of lessons, it signaled a shift in behavior. Voices dropped, faces changed, and children slipped into a version of themselves built for the classroom alone. Then there was posture, backs straight, feet flat, hands neatly placed. Slouching suggested laziness, and laziness was treated as a character flaw. You remember the ache between your shoulders, the effort of sitting still long after your body wanted to move. A gentle tap on a desk or a look from the front of the room was usually enough to correct you. Today we talk about comfort and focus. Back then, stillness itself was seen as focus. Public correction was another quiet constant. A name spoken aloud could freeze an entire room. Mistakes were addressed immediately, often in front of everyone. It wasn't meant to embarrass, it was meant to instruct. You learned quickly by watching others what not to do. Children rarely felt wronged. More often, they felt they had let themselves down. Reading aloud could be particularly tense. One by one, voices rose and fell, some confident, others barely audible. A stumble over a word could draw attention, and with it, a reminder to try harder next time. The rest of the class listened in silence, relieved it was not their turn. These moments stayed with people for years, long after the lesson itself was forgotten. Some classrooms had a desk set slightly apart, facing the wall or window. It wasn't dramatic, just separate. Sitting there meant time to think, though thinking often turned into counting minutes. You stared at peeling paint or drifting clouds, wondering how long it would last. No one explained why it happened. You worked it out for yourself and resolved not to repeat the mistake. Even playtime followed strict expectations. Lining up was orderly, movement controlled. Running ahead or lagging behind could earn a sharp reminder. Games were allowed, but only within clear boundaries. Freedom existed, but only in carefully measured amounts. Children learned quickly where those invisible lines were drawn. Privileges, too, could quietly disappear. Helping hand out books, lining up first, or being chosen for a classroom task were small honors that mattered enormously. Losing them stung more than any raised voice. These moments taught children that approval was earned through compliance. You didn't resent it. You accepted it as part of learning how the world worked. What stands out now is how little resistance there was. Children didn't go home and complain. Many parents would have asked what their child had done wrong first. Teachers were following the rules of the time, and so were families. School and home spoke the same language. Behave, listen, endure. There was comfort in knowing exactly what was expected. Clear boundaries reduced uncertainty, even if they felt heavy at times. In a crowded classroom, predictability made life simpler. Everyone moved together, learned together, and quietly absorbed the idea that standing out was risky. Looking back, it's easy to feel disbelief at how much was simply accepted. Yet, inside those classrooms, it felt normal. The routines shaped behavior quietly, efficiently, and with very little explanation. And because everyone experienced it together, it rarely felt unfair. It just felt like school, preparing us for a future where questioning authority was not yet part of the lesson. There were moments of kindness, too, though they were quieter and less remembered. A nod of approval, a neatly marked page, a brief smile when work was done well. Praise was rare enough to feel valuable, and many children worked tirelessly for it. When it came, it lingered far longer than correction ever did. That scarcity shaped how success felt, measured not in encouragement, but in absence of disappointment. Children learned to read adults carefully. A raised eyebrow, a pause, a hand resting on the desk could all carry meaning. These signals became a language of their own, understood without words. You adjusted your behavior instinctively, often before realizing why. It was training in awareness, in anticipation, in staying one step ahead of trouble. Today, classrooms hum with conversation, collaboration, and questions. We encourage curiosity, movement, and expression. Back then, learning was quieter, more contained. Knowledge was delivered, absorbed, and repeated. Feelings rarely entered the room. The aim was readiness for the wider world, not comfort within the classroom itself. For those who lived it, these rules became part of who they were. Even now, many people still sit up straighter when someone in authority enters a room. Old habits linger long after the desks and inkwells have disappeared. And as we begin to reflect on what these experiences meant, we start to see how deeply those early lessons shaped not just behavior, but the way a generation learned to navigate the world beyond the school gates. Those unspoken lessons did not end at the classroom door. They followed children into adulthood, influencing confidence, silence, and resilience, quietly shaping how many of us learned to cope, conform, and carry on without ever asking questions aloud. We learned not to draw attention, and for many of us that lesson stayed long after the school bell faded into memory. Sitting quietly, doing as we were told, blending into the background felt safer than standing out. Confidence, when it came, was cautious. You waited to be certain before speaking, because certainty had once been the price of approval. Praise was rare, and that made it powerful. A brief word at the end of a lesson, or a small mark in a book, could carry you for days. Many people still remember those moments with surprising clarity. They mattered because they were scarce. Effort was expected, not celebrated, and achievement was something you proved rather than announced. At the same time, feelings were private, not discussed. No one asked if you were nervous, overwhelmed, or unsure. You learned to manage those emotions quietly, often without the language to describe them. For some, that built resilience and independence. For others, it taught silence. Either way, it shaped how a generation learned to cope. Looking back now, this is something most people never stop to think about. The habits formed in those classrooms followed children into adulthood. Many became reliable, steady, and adaptable. They knew how to endure difficulty without complaint. Yet many also struggled to ask for help, to express uncertainty, or to believe their feelings deserved space. There was pride in getting on with things. That attitude carried Britain through enormous change, from rebuilding cities to reshaping industries. Schools played their part in creating that mindset. They rewarded composure, patience, and perseverance. Those qualities became badges of honor, quietly worn, but the cost was subtle. Emotional expression often arrived later in life, if at all. Some people only realized, decades on, how rarely they had been asked how they felt as children. Not because anyone was unkind, but because it simply wasn't part of the conversation. Many viewers will recognize this mixture of strength and restraint in themselves. It explains why praise still matters, why criticism lingers, and why emotions sometimes feel difficult to name. These patterns were not personal failings, but shared experiences learned together in silence. Desks aligned, futures quietly shaped across classrooms that looked identical from Cornwall to Cumbria during those ordered post-war years. Today, we encourage openness, discussion, and emotional literacy. We see childhood as a time to explore feelings, not suppress them. That shift can make the past feel distant, even uncomfortable. Yet understanding it helps us understand ourselves. These classrooms didn't just teach reading and numbers, they shaped voices, silences, and the way a generation learned to carry itself through the world, ready or not, without ever being asked how it felt inside. Today, if we walked into a British classroom, the difference would be immediate. Desks move, voices rise and fall, and children are encouraged to ask why, not simply listen. There is space for discussion, for reassurance, and for recognizing that learning is as emotional as it is academic. Safeguarding, pastoral care, and well-being now sit at the heart of school life. This doesn't mean the past was wrong, only that it belonged to its time. The classrooms of the 1950s were built on the values of survival, order, and shared effort. They reflected a nation recovering from hardship, doing its best with limited tools. Those systems shaped millions of lives, and many emerged resilient, capable, and quietly proud of having coped. What has changed is our understanding of childhood. Today, respect is built through understanding rather than obedience alone. Children are asked how they feel, not just how they perform. Mistakes are explored rather than publicly corrected, and individuality is often celebrated rather than softened. It is a profound shift in expectations. Looking back invites mixed emotions: gratitude that progress has been made, respect for those who lived through stricter times without complaint, and curiosity about what those experiences truly gave us. Did they make us stronger or simply quieter? Perhaps the answer is both. Strength and silence often walked hand in hand. By remembering these classrooms honestly, without blame or nostalgia alone, we honor the generations shaped within them and recognize how far we have come. Because understanding where we've been helps us appreciate where we are now and reminds us that change, when it comes, is built quietly, lesson by lesson. In doing so, we carry their stories forward, not as judgment, but as context, memory, and a reminder that every era teaches in its own way quietly.